I don't care who won the Chiefs. I hate it here. Make me sick. My allergy. Puke every time. Blah, like that. Puke.
Well, you're a goalie. You're supposed to be like that.
One of the topics that has come up in discussion is, for the Winter Classic, is Pens Caps a good matchup for the league, with some of its marquee players out there, or would a more traditional rivalry be a good way to go at this point? Do you consider bringing in Canadian teams for an event that, granted, is aimed at a U.S. audience? And for my take, growing up in the Sun Belt, following Sun Belt teams, the importance of having U.S.-based teams, I think, is somewhat diminished. I think that people will watch a good matchup with the Leafs or with the Canadiens. Do you necessarily want to throw Vancouver, Edmonton, or Calgary into that mix? That's probably worthy of some debate. And certainly you're not going to have an outdoor game with Carolina, Tampa, Florida, Atlanta, Nashville. But certainly the notion of the Rangers and Habs or Rangers Islanders, granted not under current circumstances, but were the Islanders a little better team, I think that would be a very fun game to watch. You've grown up in an Original Six market. What's the Original Six take on it?
I think it's a little different in the sense that from the Original Six perspective, especially if you're a longtime fan, you appreciate the game. Yes, it's a little different when you're playing Boston. It's a little different when you're playing Montreal or the Leafs and Chicago. But unless you're talking about a team like, Columbus or one of those sort of, whatever teams, you're just going to want to see a good game. You're going to appreciate a good game, especially if you put the Rangers in the Classic. I mean, I think there's a lot of options. Like you said, there's the Islanders, there's obviously the Devils. I don't think you're going to want to be that New York Metro-centric. You're going to want to bring in at least two markets, and you're going to want to bring in a second interesting team. The good thing about the Rangers is obviously they have a lot of history with a number of teams, a lot of rivalries. Unfortunately, though, it's been teams that have already played in the Classic, and how quickly do you want to recycle them? If they're talking about New York, they're talking either Citi Field or perhaps the New Meadowlands for next year. A Rangers-Flyers game would be great. Rangers-Canadiens. I say bring in the Canadiens. I think you need to have the marquee historical franchise for this game. If you're a casual fan, if you're just flipping around, maybe you're not into football, you're just New Year's Day, it's different, it's snowing, it's got all that ambiance, you hear a little buzz about it, you don't really care. It doesn't matter that it's the Canadiens, that it's not an American team. I mean, you're going to be more excited about it if it's the St. Louis Blues. I think if you're trying to sell the game of hockey, you have to bring in, it's not a secret to non-hockey fans that hockey is popular in Canada and that Canadians really like the game. So I think just, pretending that Canada doesn't exist is somehow going to make Americans more excited about the game. I don't understand the rationale for that. The only, from a marketing and TV perspective, that it makes sense is you want that secondary market. NBC is going to want two of their metered markets in the game. And so I think, I don't have any insight to this officially, but I would imagine that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks, not so much from a marketing standpoint.
And one of the things that I think is one of the complaints that one hears about coverage, let's just take ESPN for example. One of the great gripes that I've heard, but to a point has been echoed in the teams that Versus has covered, is that there is a New York and Boston centricity to their selection games that they air. It hasn't been as noticeable this year, which to their credit. But for fans living in, say, the Midwest, where there is a strong hockey tradition, it's not necessarily implying that one wants to go right out and see, the Minnesota Wild in the next Winter Classic, but certainly Minnesota or the Minneapolis-St. Paul area is a very dedicated hockey market, and it is certainly a traditional one. One could make the argument that if you wanted to throw the Wild and the Dallas Stars in at Minnesota's UCF Stadium at the University of Minnesota, I could see that selling, but like you said, without one of your top 10 markets television-wise being represented in that could be a bit of a stretch. But at that point, then the contrary argument is, well, Dallas is a top 10 market, or Denver with the Avalanche is another top 10 market. But again, you certainly get away from your traditional franchises at that point, and I think that the dedicated hockey fan is going to want to see the original six. But there are a lot of arguments in both directions. Pre-expansion, post-expansion, blah blah blah. Again, how much original six do you go with, or do you go with that initial expansion where you saw the Flyers come in, you saw the North Stars come in, you saw St. Louis come in? What is acceptable to an older fan on that?
Obviously it's going to be different for everybody. I think it just comes down to, for the dedicated fan, they're going to watch. If you're an NHL fan, if you're watching a Versus game on Tuesday night, you're going to watch the Winter Classic. I mean, let's be honest. Yeah, if you put, my favorite whipping boy is Columbus. I don't understand why they're in the league. If you put the Wild versus the Blue Jackets, yeah, it's going to be a painful sell. One of my wishes would be that the Wild, A, had a better name, and B, were relevant in the league. Because you're right. Minnesota is a hockey hotbed, for, to use the cliche term. Now, granted, the NHL, strangely enough, is sort of the third place version of hockey out there, behind high school and college. But still, that's a market that you'd want to get into. They have to make the playoffs at some point and make a little noise here. I think one of the problems I had, and this is always going to be a problem with a marketing gimmick, and let's be honest, this is a marketing gimmick, is you throw a lot of great stuff out at first, and then you're like, what now? Look at the games they've had. The first one was in Buffalo. Okay, secondary market, but they had the Penguins, so you're bringing in your marquee player. The second game, they go to Wrigley Field, so you have that sort of ambiance. You go, Blackhawks, Red Wings. How much better does it get than that? Last year, Fenway, again, another iconic stadium. Bruins and Flyers. It's great. This year, obviously, Penguins, Capitals, your marquee teams, your marquee players. Not so much about the arena this year. I saw something with Bettman, and he said, they're really looking more towards these kind of football stadiums because they have better sight lines, more people. And, as he said, and, I'll probably go to hell for this, but I think he has a point is, unless, I've missed my guess, we're out of 100-year-old baseball stadiums to go play in. So that was always sort of that, it's always that feeling is you want to go to a great location and you want to have a great team. Well, that's a very limited pool to draw from.
Well, and especially given the success of other outdoor hockey events. I mean, you made it that you had the Michigan State game this year played in front of 113,000 people in Ann Arbor.
Right.
My God.
I mean, let's be honest. The game's got to go to Detroit at some point. And now they talked about maybe putting it in the big house, but Bettman's point was, what if Michigan is playing a bowl game that day? I'm not quite sure that plays into it, but...
Well, and the other thing is, Michigan, at the risk of offending our friends who are listening who are fans of Lou and Mays, they ain't going to get any better anytime soon. That football program is in a shambles right now. But nonetheless, your point is a good one. But at that point, the other question becomes: do you need to have it in a major league sports stadium? I mean, people again demonstrated their willingness to come sit on cold bleacher seats to watch the Wolverines and Spartans play hockey. So, if you're a Red Wings fan, do you think you can draw 100,000 people to watch the Red Wings? And let's say, I would certainly travel to watch the Red Wings and Leafs play outdoors in Michigan. I think that would be a hell of a game to watch. But again, that's me as a sort of non-traditional fan dedicated to the game, certainly, but who gets what that kind of tradition means. Again, I mean, you're going out on a limb that you're gonna use Toronto as opposed to another major American market, and Detroit Detroit is certainly a major hockey market, but they're not as big a TV market.
That's going to be the internal debate that they're going to have, and that's something that's going to be an issue, obviously, between the NHL and NBC. If the NBC is the partner going forward, is this a TV event? Is it a overall marketing event? Is it a bump for the local teams? And I'm sure it's obviously all of those things. How do you weight it? At some point, you're going to have to bring in a Canadian team. Right? And I know they're trying to do this with the Heritage Classic, and they're going to have this outdoor game in Calgary with the Flames and the Canadians, and that's all nice and everything. But you're going to have to do the gimmick, because what are the matchups? I mean, seriously, unless you put it in New York, and even then, when do you start recycling? If you put it in New York, you're not going to do the Islanders, you're not going to do the Devils. Are you going to recycle the Bruins? Are you going to recycle the Flyers? Who else is an interesting draw? If you put in Detroit, how do you not bring in Toronto? I mean, what's the other option?
One of the things that the NHL is going to have to accept the reality of at some point is, if you want games that are going to be physical, and yes, God forbid that you'll see a fight or two in, you got to bring in divisional rivals. You got to bring in teams that know each other and hate each other. What do we want to see? We don't want to see a couple of teams who've never seen each other before. We want to see a couple of teams who are going to go and beat the bejesus out of each other, because that's what makes for exciting hockey, frankly, is the physicality of it. You want to see two good teams that don't like each other.
It's funny. You asked me about the original six perspective, and I would say back to you as the non-traditional fan perspective. Does seeing a West Coast team, the Dallas isn't obviously West Coast, but specific division, San Jose, the Kings in the game, does that get some juice for you? For me, it's who wants to see these guys? But do you bring a Colorado in? And then who do you put them up against? Do you put them up against Los Angeles? They're not a division rival, but they play some games.
But in point of fact, the team you put them up against, even though that rivalry has cooled off, you put them up against
Detroit. Yeah.
Oh my God! I mean, some of those incredible brawls, and they were great games too. We're talking about 5-4 type games where it was a dogfight the whole way in. You had a billion penalty minutes and a billion goals, and it wasn't because because there was no defense being played. It was because both teams were scoring hard-working goals and not letting up for a second.
But then again, you're back to how soon do you recycle the Red Wings, and you're falling back on the crutch of historic team, historic rivalry. If you take out some of the teams that were there and you say we're not, we're going to bite the bullet. We're going to go we're not going to put in an original six. Now, obviously, this year there's not an original six, but you're talking, Crosby and Ovechkin.
Clearly, the NHL has made the decision to go with the first wave of expansion teams and back. Okay, that's perfectly valid.
But then does the Winter can only become an Atlantic and Northeast Division property?
Well, therein lies the problem, because the whole Norris Division bloodbath kind of thing that we all used to look forward to. Well, the Norris Division has been kind of chopped up now. Again, ultimately, I think that you mentioned recycling the Red Wings too quickly. I suppose in the near term, you pretty much are in a position where you have to use the Rangers in the foreseeable future. I think that as long as they continue to improve, and one of the issues with using the Rangers in the last couple of years has been they just haven't been very good.
Fair enough. But I will tell you, this year's team, or forecasting ahead, assuming no major career-ending injuries. Next year's team, it's a good, hard-working team. You'll get a good game out of them. So I like the idea of using the Rangers. Let's imagine for a moment where Bill Daly and Gary Bettman, we're putting the Rangers in, and we're going to do it in New York. Who are we putting against them? I say Montreal.
I completely agree.